Okay, so you want to run a fight promotion, sell out an arena, put two fighters in a cage, watch the crowd lose its mind when someone gets knocked out, and collect the gate on the way home. It looks like one of the simplest businesses in sports. Put on a violent show, charge admission, repeat. And for one company, that exact formula turned a $2 million startup into a $12 billion empire in 22 years. Here's what that success story doesn't show you. At least two other companies tried to run the same playbook with real money, real stars, and real television deals, and both were gone within 2 years. One of them nearly $60 million in debt. Same sport, same basic idea, completely different outcome. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why one fight promotion becomes a multi-billion-dollar empire and another one burns through its funding before its third event. People think a fight promotion is a sports business, where the point is to find the best fighters and put on the best fights. In reality, it's a media distribution business that happens to sell tickets to violence. The fighters are the product on screen, but the actual value sits in who controls the broadcast rights, who owns the athletes' contracts, and who has enough leverage to make every serious fighter want to sign with them instead of anyone else. Miss that distinction and you can build a genuinely entertaining show that still goes bankrupt in under 2 years. A regional promotion runs small local cards, sometimes in a rented ballroom or a modest arena, selling tickets in person and streaming to a few thousand viewers at most. It's the cheapest way into this business by a wide margin, and almost nobody in it expects to get rich. A challenger promotion tries to compete directly with the market leader, signing recognizable names, chasing a national television or pay-per-view deal, and spending like a major league from day one. This is the most dangerous category in the entire genre, and we'll spend real time on why. And then there's the dominant global promotion, the one that has already won the distribution war, controls the majority of top-tier talent, and increasingly earns its money from a fixed media rights check rather than how many people order a given event. This is where the UFC itself now sits, and understanding how it got there is most of what this video is about. There's a fourth model worth naming too because it's the newest and it's still an open question whether it works. The streaming first challenger, a promotion that skips the pay-per-view fight entirely and instead builds its business around a direct subscription or free ad-supported platform, betting that a lower cost of entry for fans matters more than matching the leader's star power fight for fight. It's a genuinely different bet than the head-on challenger approach that failed twice in the 2000s because it doesn't require beating the leader's biggest names, it requires beating them on convenience and price, a bet still being tested in real time as this video is being made. Start at the regional level because it's the honest entry point for almost everyone in this business. A regulation cage alone runs $8,000 to $20,000. A state athletic commission promoter's permit is often just a few $100s, sometimes closer to $100, and the commission then takes a cut of the gate once tickets are sold, typically 5% in states like California, and as much as 8% with no cap at all in Nevada. Fighter purses at the regional level are modest by design. A prelim level regional fighter might earn $1,000 to $7,000 per bout. An unsigned prospect with real buzz can command $20,000 to $34,000 a fight if a promoter is willing to pay for the drawing power. Add venue rental, insurance, medical staff required by the commission, and basic production if you want the event streamed at all, and the single modest regional card can easily run $30,000 or more before a single ticket is sold, with most local promoters accepting that they'll barely break even, if they break even at all most of the time. Now scale that ambition up to challenger status and the numbers change categories entirely. A single major event with legitimate star power, arena rental, a full production crew, insurance for main event level fighters, and purses large enough to actually lure names away from the market leader can run into the millions of dollars for one single night. And unlike the regional level, a challenger promotion is making that bet without the leader's decades of accumulated fan loyalty, broadcast relationships, or negotiating leverage with venues and networks. That gap between regional math and challenger math is the whole trap of this business, and it isn't a smooth ramp from one to the other. A regional promoter can grow slowly, card by card, reinvesting modest profits and building a local following over years, without ever risking the whole operation on one night. A challenger promotion, by definition, is trying to skip that decade of gradual trust building and buy its way to relevance in a handful of events, which means every single card carries existential stakes from the very first one, long before the brand has any cushion of loyal fans or broadcast goodwill to fall back on if a single show underperforms. Combat sports in in the United States are regulated state by state, not nationally, which means a promoter is effectively negotiating with a different landlord in every market. Nevada takes an uncapped 8% of the gate with no ceiling. California caps its take at a fixed dollar amount per event regardless of size. Some states charge a flat few $100s and barely involve themselves beyond safety inspections. That patchwork is exactly why so many major cards cluster in the same handful of states. Nevada and a few other commission-friendly jurisdictions offer predictable costs and venues built for exactly this kind of event, while promoting in an unfamiliar state means learning a new fee structure and a new relationship with regulators from scratch. None of this regulation is optional overhead a promoter can skip to save money either. Every commission requires licensed ringside physicians, pre-fight medical screening, and insurance coverage for every fighter on the card. Coverage that can range from a couple $1,000s in minimum benefits up to $100,000 depending on the state and the level of the event. Skip that layer and a promoter isn't just risking a fine, they're risking the commission simply refusing to issue the permit that lets the event happen at all. At the top of this sport, entry-level pay has barely moved in a decade. In 2014, a new fighter's contract paid $8,000 to show and $8,000 more to win. By 2016, that had crept up to 10 and 10. Today, it sits at 12,000 and 12,000, a $4,000 increase over roughly 10 years, for fighters taking on some of the highest physical risk of any athlete in professional sports. Even that number overstates what a fighter actually keeps. A typical advisory structure takes a manager's cut of 15 to 20%, a trainer's cut of 10 to 15%, and smaller cuts for cornermen on top of that, together consuming 27 to 40% of the purse before tax is even calculated. One former fighter has publicly described netting just $5,500 in actual profit from a $20,000 purse. Once camp costs, cornermen, and taxes were subtracted, for a training camp that can itself run $50,000 to $100,000 in facility and sparring partner costs for a serious main event preparation. At the very top of the sport, the math looks nothing like this. Champions and headliners can negotiate base pay from $500,000 to several $1 million, plus performance bonuses that now run up to $100,000 for fight of the night or performance of the night, plus historically a cut of pay-per-view revenue once a card crossed a buy threshold, sometimes $1 to $3 per buy. When a single blockbuster event sells 2.4 million buys, as one of the biggest cards in the sport's history did, that revenue share alone can be worth well over $100 million split among the top of that card. The gap between a $12,000 prelim fighter and a headliner on that kind of card isn't a difference of degree, it's two completely different pay structures operating inside the same sport. Every fighter, in effect, is running their own tiny business inside someone else's much larger one, and the accounting rarely gets easier the longer a career goes. Camp costs don't shrink for a veteran the way overhead often does in other small businesses, since a serious main event preparation still needs a full team of sparring partners, strength coaches, and nutritionists, regardless of how many times a fighter has done this before. And a canceled or postponed bout, common in a sport built on human bodies, can wipe out months of training expense with no matching payday to show for it. This is the number that explains almost everything else in this business. Across major US professional sports leagues, athletes typically receive somewhere around 48 to 50% of total league revenue, a split negotiated by players' unions with real collective bargaining power. In this sport, fighters have historically received somewhere around 13 to 20% of total revenue, less than half the share athletes get almost anywhere else in professional sports. And fighters, classified as independent contractors rather than employees, have never had the same union leverage to negotiate that number upward. That gap didn't go unnoticed forever. A class action lawsuit alleging exactly this kind of suppressed pay, brought by fighters against the dominant promotion, threatened the company with as much as $1.6 billion in potential damages had it gone to trial. Rather than risk that outcome, the promotion settled in September 2024 for $375 million, $335 million of it earmarked directly for fighters. The distribution of that settlement told its own story. The single largest individual payout was $10.3 million. The average payout across everyone covered was $231,000, and the median, the number that represents what a typical fighter in the suit actually received, was $86,000. Even a lawsuit specifically about fighters being underpaid ended up distributing most of its value toward the top of the roster. Now overlay the biggest structural shift the business has made in years. Starting in 2026, the dominant promotion's US broadcasts moved from the old pay-per-view model, where fans paid $60 to $80 per event on top of an existing subscription, to a flat-rate streaming deal worth $7.7 billion, eliminating the surcharge entirely. For the promotion, this converts a lumpy, unpredictable revenue stream into a guaranteed one. Massive money arrives whether a given card is thrilling or forgettable. For headliners, the old system of pay-per-view points is being replaced by negotiated flat fees in the $2 to $4 million range for top stars, plus new bonuses tied to streaming engagement, minutes watched, and subscriber retention, rather than raw buy counts. The volatility for stars is gone, and the floor is somewhat higher. For the $12,000 prelim fighter, none of this restructuring has moved the number at all. There's a structural irony sitting underneath this entire shift that's worth naming directly. The same market dominance that let this promotion negotiate a $7 billion plus media deal is the exact thing the antitrust lawsuit argued had suppressed fighter pay in the first place. Total control over distribution is precisely what makes a business this valuable to a broadcaster, and precisely what gives it the leverage to keep the labor cost underneath that value as low as it's willing to pay. The settlement changed the number retroactively. It didn't change the structure that produced the number in the first place. Here's what happens when real money tries to challenge a dominant promotion head-on. In 2007, a promotion called EliteXC launched with a genuine network television deal on CBS, a roster that included breakout stars and real financial backing. It looked, from the outside, like a legitimate second option in the sport. 18 months later, it was gone, having lost more than $55 million, filing for bankruptcy protection, and canceling its own final event outright rather than run it. Analysts pointed to a specific structural mistake. EliteXC kept feeding its stars easy matchups to protect win records, which meant fans stopped believing any given fight actually mattered, and a fight promotion that fans don't trust to deliver real stakes has nothing left to sell. A separate promotion, Affliction, built on the marketing muscle of an apparel brand rather than broadcast experience, tried the same head-on challenge a year later, signing a genuine former heavyweight champion and one of the sport's most feared fighters at the time. It ran exactly 2 pay-per-view events, both hemorrhaging money on purses and production without the distribution relationships or fan loyalty the market leader had spent years building. Its third event collapsed 8 days out when its headliner failed a drug test, and rather than absorb another loss, the promotion folded entirely, facing lawsuits from fighters over unpaid guarantees on its way out. Neither of these companies failed because the fighting itself was bad, and neither failed because they didn't have money behind them. They failed because challenging an entrenched distribution leader in this business means competing on the leader's home turf, existing broadcast relationships, existing fan trust, and existing negotiating leverage with venues, all while burning cash at a rate a true regional promoter would never risk in the first place. Now look at the other side of the same sport. In 2001, the promotion that would become the dominant global leader was purchased for $2 million by new ownership, at a moment the sport was so controversial that major cable providers refused to carry its events, and a sitting US senator campaigned to have it banned outright. Over the next 15 years, that ownership rebuilt the sport's relationship with athletic commissions, built genuine mainstream broadcast partnerships, and turned a fringe spectacle into a legitimate global product. In 2016, the company sold for just over $4 billion. In 2023, as part of a merger that created a new publicly traded parent company, the same business was valued at $12.1 billion, a gain of roughly 600,000% from its $2 million starting point 22 years earlier. The difference between these outcomes was never about who had better fighters on a given weekend. It was about which company controlled distribution, broadcast relationships, and fighter contracts long enough for those assets to compound, and which companies tried to buy their way past that advantage in 18 months with a checkbook instead. The lesson didn't stop applying once those 2 collapses happened. Every serious challenger since has faced the identical structural problem, just dressed differently. A well-funded competitor can still sign recognizable names, land a real broadcast partner, and put on a genuinely watchable card, and still spend a decade fighting for a fraction of the market leader's revenue, because broadcast leverage and fan trust, once they compound for one company over 2 decades, don't reset just because a rival shows up with a bigger checkbook and a star fighter or 2. The moat in this business was never the cage. It was the 20 years of relationships built around it. Put a full year on a serious regional promotion, the kind most new entrants into this business would realistically be running rather than a global broadcast operation, starting with the version where things go according to plan. In the optimistic scenario, a promoter runs 6 to 8 cards a year, builds a loyal local following, keeps purses modest but fair, and gradually earns a reputation that lets ticket prices and sponsorship rates climb year over year. Gate revenue plus modest streaming and sponsorship income covers costs with room to spare. 1 or 2 fighters on the roster get noticed and signed away by a bigger promotion, which, handled right, becomes free marketing rather than a loss, since developed by us becomes part of the brand. The promotion turns a real, if modest, profit and slowly becomes the trusted proving ground in its region. In the realistic scenario, 2 or 3 ordinary things go wrong at once. Nothing scandalous, just the normal friction of a genuinely hard business. A main event fighter pulls out with an injury 2 weeks before the card, and the replacement doesn't sell the same number of tickets. The venue raises its rental rate for the next booking. A competing local promotion undercuts on fighter pay and pulls a couple of prospects away before they were ready to headline. Gate revenue comes in 20 to 30% under projection, purses and commission fees stay exactly the same regardless, and the card that was supposed to be a modest profit turns into a modest loss. The kind that's rarely fatal on its own, but that stacks up fast if it happens 2 or 3 cards running. That's the gap this business runs on at the regional level, somewhere between a sustainable local institution and a promoter quietly subsidizing their own hobby. And the deciding factor is almost never the quality of the fights themselves. It's whether the promotion can survive the ordinary bad weeks, an injury, a venue increase, a rival poaching talent, without the whole structure tipping into the red. Run the same 2 outcomes through a single fighter's career instead of a promotion's books, because the same gap shows up there too. An optimistic career path means staying healthy enough to keep fighting regularly, winning consistently enough to climb toward main card slots, and picking up at least 1 performance bonus a year, turning a string of $12,000 purses into something closer to a real living wage within a few years. A realistic career path means 1 bad injury, 1 canceled camp, or 1 2-fight losing streak that drops a fighter back down the card, and the exact same training investment that was supposed to build a career instead produces a net loss for the year, because the purse structure doesn't distinguish between a fighter who's building momentum and one who's rebuilding it. Scale that same fragility up to challenger promotion size, and it stops being survivable at all. EliteXC and Affliction weren't undercapitalized by regional standards. They were extraordinarily well-funded compared to any local card. What they lacked was the years of accumulated trust, broadcast leverage, and fan loyalty that let the dominant promotion absorb a bad night without it becoming an existential threat. A regional promoter losing money on 1 card can run a cheaper show next month and recover. A challenger promotion burning through millions per event on borrowed credibility usually doesn't get a next month at all. So this was never really a story about who can find the toughest fighters. It was a story about who controls the thing that turns a violent spectacle into a compounding asset. Distribution, broadcast relationships, and fighter contracts held long enough for that leverage to actually build on itself. None of the formats in this video are doomed, and none of them are guaranteed. A regional promotion run with patience and financial discipline can become the trusted proving ground of its market for decades. A challenger with real money can still fail in 18 months if it tries to skip the years of trust building the market leader spent building first. What separates the promotion that compounds into a multi-billion-dollar asset from the one that quietly folds mid-season was never how hard the fighters hit. It's whether the business underneath them was ever built to survive the ordinary bad months on the way to the good ones. And underneath all 3 levels of this business sits the same uncomfortable arithmetic. The fighters are the entire reason anyone buys a ticket or opens the app, and they're also the group with the least leverage to negotiate what that's actually worth. That imbalance built one of the most valuable properties in modern sports. It also means the person taking on the most physical risk in the building is, in the vast majority of cases, the one splitting the smallest piece of what that risk generates. If you were putting your own money into this sport, would you rather own a small piece of the dominant promotion or bet on building a regional one from scratch? Tell me in the comments. If this laid out numbers you'd never actually seen broken down before, a like helps more than you'd think. And if you want the same breakdown for another business people think they understand, subscribe. Every week, one more business that looks simpler from the outside than it actually is.